Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Talking Tradesman. With me in the studio today, I have Glenn Everard, who is a painter and decorator. First of all, Glenn, let's talk. The first thing I do want to say is a big shout out to Matt Willis, our mutual friend, for pointing Glenn in my direction. Let's get into your story, my friend.
Okay, yeah, we'll do. Thanks to Matt for giving me the nod to come and do it.
Big thanks, Matt.
Yeah, I kind of when I was thinking about the podcast, I thought, what do I talk about? Am I qualified to go on there and talk about it? And I thought, well, we talk about suicide. We've got suicide in the family, depression, anxiety, addiction, and sort of recovery. So I thought, I've kind of, I've earned the badge to come and
definitely, mate. I mean, we've spoken pre-record. You definitely have. But at the same time, on that subject, I genuinely believe that anybody that is alive has sort of got reason to come and talk. Because I don't think anybody, certainly by my age, by your age, you don't get through life without a few scars.
No.
And when it comes to mental health, it's something that affects everybody throughout every stage of life. We all, unfortunately, experience things like bereavements. We all go through hard times financially and emotionally. That's all mental health.
Yeah.
So I would pretty much argue that anybody, certainly, in their middle ages, as it were, or even before that, have probably got warrant to sit in that chair and talk about their life, which is exactly what I'm advocating for, which is to get people talking and break down that stigma around talking and let people know how common it is that people have struggles and adversities that they have to get through. So with that in mind, my friend, let's get into you and yours.
Bang. Well, I want to show you a picture. Obviously, you can see the picture of how I am now.
Absolutely, mate. Looking fine.
This was the sort of for me, this was the end of the beginning, so to speak.
Oh, wow. Okay, I mean, obviously for the people watching or even listening, they can't see what I'm seeing, but that doesn't even look like you.
No.
I mean, I'm looking at, so Glenn's just shown me a picture. I'm looking at somebody who is considerably heavier.
That was 14 years. That was 14 years ago as well.
14 years ago.
So I'm 14 years older than that picture. I mean, I look about.
You look
65.
I was going to say, you look 20 years older in this than you do sat in front of me now.
Yeah.
You look unhealthy. You've got a lot more weight on you, bloated, red in the face, and you're certainly not a picture of health in this. So wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think. I mean, I was 41.
41
when that was taken.
You were 41.
So I was 41. So
I'm
sorry,
40.
that was so I was a year older than you.
Wow.
Then, so that was what am I now? I'm 43. So that was 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And that was, I think I was probably, I'd have been dead within a year.
Jesus.
I think if I hadn't have done something about, I mean, for me, it was alcohol.
So I was just going to say, so to everybody listening and watching, what was your life at that point?
41, I was a non-functioning alcoholic.
Okay.
In an awful lot of pain. And I didn't know what was wrong with me.
Physical or mental?
Mental. Purely mental. Physically, I mean, I was fairly fit. I say I was fairly fit. Look at that picture. I wasn't fit then. But through my 20s and 30s, I always kept myself quite fit. I was a squash player. I always went to the gym. So, I
mean, what I'll say, Glenn, at this point, just in case you haven't got to give me an answer now, but if you give permission for me to, I'll insert that picture into this segment of the podcast, just so everybody can see exactly what you're talking about here. Because I think it's quite a striking visual sort of indication of where you were at. So,
I mean, at that stage, within a month, I was in rehab. But I'll come to that. We'll go back a little bit because, as I say, that was the
let's go back.
The end of the beginning. Really.
The end of the beginning of.
I mean, I look back at that picture now and I think I'm not the person in that picture. It's almost like I look at it and I think it's just a different person.
Yeah.
You know, as I say, I was in so much pain, so much mental pain, and I didn't have a clue what was wrong with me. And it's taken from, going into rehab and the followings, up until now.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot of, going into there and finding out exactly.
Well, I mean, well done
what was wrong. Thank you
for pulling yourself from there to here.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got experience and grown up around, alcohol issues, so I know how difficult it can be, and I know how many people don't get through and don't make that change. So you've got to have a hell of a strength to recognise it and make that change. So I don't mean sound patronising by saying well done,
No, thank you.
but genuinely well done, because it's not an easy battle to win.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the recovery rates from, it's pitifully low.
Yeah.
It's, it's in single figures. Even people that go,
as in percentages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
I'll talk a bit about sort of 12-step recovery and that, but they people that go into a 12-step program and are still there after 10 years, they call them the 3%ers. That's what they refer to themselves as, because there's around about 3%. So every 100 people that go through the door after 10 years, there's only 3 left. In that figure, you've probably got people that don't still go to meetings and drift off and find their own path. Either, not drinking or find the path that I've found. I still do drink in moderation.
I must say that. So that was a part of the conversation that we spoke about pre-record that really did twig my interest, because I would say that I think probably all people that have referred to themselves as an alcoholic, it is teetotal. So it is complete. I think I've heard it referred to as the fact that you're never not an alcoholic. You are either in addiction or recovering, and you're always one of the two. You're never not an addict, as it were, when it comes to alcohol. I'm not to say that I'd agreed with that, but I've heard it described that way. So when you told me that you still do occasionally drink, I was quite surprised by that. That's quite, I think you're the first person I've spoke to that has said that they had an alcohol addiction but can now manage it that way. So it's quite an interesting thing. We'll get into that.
Okay. Do you want to get into it now?
Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's keep it roughly chronological, and I guess as long as you're comfortable doing so, is talk about what led you into that lifestyle and addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mentioned suicide earlier.
Yeah.
So going back, my mum's brother took his own life when he was 28.
Wow.
My mum and dad are both from London. Mum's from southeast London. Dad's from North London. So it was mum and her brother. They'd lost, my nan and granddad had another boy who died he was a few months old. Very sad. But Paul, my mum's brother, my uncle, he was deeply troubled. He had all sorts of mental health problems. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Okay.
And they had all sorts of problems with him being at home. He was gay, back in an era when it wasn't.
It wasn't spoken about or accepted.
No. It was illegal. It was illegal.
Yeah, it was. Of course.
I think it would have been him growing up in the 50s and 60s in London, and it was actually against the law.
Yeah.
And it was, the culture back then was quite homophobic.
Yeah.
It wasn't until it was 1967 when they actually changed the law.
Wow.
There was something called the Wolfenden Report, and they actually they decriminalised homosexuality, being gay. So he grew up during that very.
It's incredible, isn't it, Glenn? Like, just to pause on that a moment and reflect that was only 1967.
Yeah.
So we're talking, I'm going to put myself on the spot and do quick maths here, but only 62 years ago.
That's right.
When I
was born in 71, so 5 years before I was born, it was illegal. It was illegal to be gay. I was looking up something the other day. They used to. when people go on about pride and, why do they have to have pride? Why do they have to celebrate it? Why can't they just keep it to themselves and be quiet? A friend of mine posted this on Facebook, something anti-pride.
Mm.
And I was typing a reply and I thought, don't bother. There's no point talking to somebody like that. You won't change their view.
Yeah.
But basically they used to hang people.
Yeah.
I mean, the last two men were hung in 1886 or something in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, around the world in places like Iran, they still do. It's still punishable by
Absolutely.
death.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, back to my uncle. He was in and out of psychiatric units. He even had aversion therapy. Back then, there was a thing called aversion therapy.
Is that where they
Have you heard
try
of
to
it?
change
They
you?
try and make you straight.
Oh, cross, man. Yeah.
I don't know what the process was, but it sounds pretty awful.
Yeah.
And the psychiatrist, because my family, my grandparents always said, he wasn't gay. He just had homosexual tendencies, whatever that means. But this was the report from the psychiatrist. And he then went into, there was a place called Cane Hill in Croydon, which was a psychiatric unit. It's closed now. And he was put in padded cells. He was put in straitjackets. I mean, he was deeply troubled.
Was this? Would you say that the root of those problems were the fact of how he was rejected for being gay, or
I don't
tried to
know.
suppress it?
I
Or?
don't know. I mean, my family never really spoke about it
Right.
over the years. So I mean, I did ask a few questions, but nobody really wanted to. It's just, I mean, it must have been such a trauma for them to. I mean, I'll tell you exactly what happened. They lived in, Nan and Grandad lived in Forest Hill, and they were council tenants, and they were being moved to, I think, Sydenham or somewhere like that in southeast London. And the day they moved, they said to Paul, because he'd become quite disruptive at home, he'd attacked my granddad. He was quite violent at times. And they moved, and they said, "You're not coming with us." And the day they moved, he went to Forest Hill train station and jumped in front of a train. 28 years of age,
Wow.
And that, to them, God, I mean, I don't know how you'd get over something like that. But
No.
growing up, the little bit I did hear them talk about it, they blamed each other. There was just, and that trauma just carried on through
Held within the family.
lives. Yeah, absolutely. And even though when we were small, we were children, but you kind of, I remember the feelings.
Like a shockwave, isn't it?
Yeah,
There's a shockwave.
The ripples go out.
I don't know whether you believe in like energy as such, but I do. I believe you can pick up on people's energy,
Absolutely.
their vibrations, as it were.
Yeah.
And those kind of traumatic events, they send out that shockwave and ripple, and particularly when people don't process it. And it's worth pointing out that there is a big generational thing there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's sort of traumas and tragedies in my family that were just swept under the carpet and never spoken about. I mean, my grandparents, for example, my father, he had a younger sister that passed away sadly when she was young. She'd got spina bifida, which now is treatable. Then it wasn't. And I didn't even know that was the case until I was in my teens, because nobody ever spoke about the loss, as it were. And even my dad said that his parents had not spoken about it for 25 years. She was not the forgotten child, but just not spoken. The whole thing was that traumatic. It just wasn't spoken about, but a lot of that generation were like that, weren't they? It was a stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that. It just wasn't the done thing. So yeah, it's those traumas they intensify.
Yeah. And I mean, it definitely affected my granddad, because fast forward 30 odd years, and he ended up in a psychiatric unit.
Oh, really?
He ended up in Wellawing in Bedford, suffering from anxiety and depression. I don't think he ever got over it.
Yeah.
don't think he ever got over it. Nan passed away. She had a heart attack when she was 69, and I think he survived another 3 years. But he was in and out of, he'd come to live with us for a long time after Nan died, and he just he was riddled with anxiety, and so he ended up in Wellowing, where he actually had, because Paul, my uncle, actually had electric shock treatment as well to try and.
Do you know what? When you said about they tried to cure him from being gay, I had in my mind, I thought, I'm sure they did electrolysis for that.
I think they did.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, but I didn't want to say it and it not be correct.
Yeah,
I think
I think they did. I think they did. I think they showed. I mean, I might be wrong. I'd have to Google it afterwards. But I think they
there was something in my mind.
They showed different images and shocked the. I mean, it makes it even more horrendous.
Oh, it's horrific.
It's almost like torture.
It is. It's like medieval ideology where I think their thoughts were that if they were to disrupt the brain waves, so they obviously had some kind of understanding of brain function, that if they could disrupt the brain waves and then, like you say, show certain images, that you could essentially rewire the brain through electric shock treatment, which is horrific.
I think it was outlawed eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't do it anymore.
Well, they used to do it with psychiatric patients as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Christ, if we go back far enough, there was a time where lobotomy was a treatment for people with, psychotic or psychological issues, as it were. There was a time, actually, where you could... lobotomy was offered as a virtual cure on the street. So they used to lobotomize people through the... going off track a little here, but they used to lobotomize people through the corner of the eye. I don't know if you're aware of that. I remember part of my study in psychology and social science, there were adverts where it was like... Dr. So-and-so will be in Hyde Park at between 10 and 12 p.m.
doing pop-up lobotomies.
Offering street lobotomies.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was literally a hammer and a needle through the corner of the eye, and bang, and off you go. You'll be fine now. You're suffering from a headache? Come and get a lobotomy.
Yeah. And then died of an infection a couple of weeks later.
It's just incredible that was a thing, but it was, and not all that long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but... Grandad had this the ECT, I think it was called, where it for people with depression.
Yeah,
and it's like a shock to the brain, which kind of somehow sort of reboots it, or
Yeah,
he had that and died 24 hours later.
Oh, Christ!
And it was almost like he wanted it done because Paul had it done all those years ago.
Wanted to know what,
and I think
he
felt guilty, and what they'd put him through. They didn't. They were trying to help him. I've spoken to a cousin of Mum's, and she's, one thing she says is, he was so like you. You look so similar to him.
Really?
And I've seen pictures of him, and I look at him and I think, God, it's uncanny. My granddad used to look at me and say, "You're Paul. You're Paul, sort of reincarnated."
Wow.
But yeah, he had this ECT and died 24 hours later. So that was,
that's really sad.
Yeah, that was...
I'm sorry to jump in on this one, mate, but how was that for you to be told that you looked so similar to your uncle that had taken his own life? Did that carry some sort of strange weight within your family dynamic?
I mean, it used to annoy my dad because when I kind of asked Dad about Paul, I said, "What was he like?" And he said, "Well, he was clearly gay. He was quite effeminate." So I think this was before Dad found out about me. So I was probably 14, 15. And when Grandad used to say, it's Paul, he'd come away on holiday with us and he'd just sit there looking at me and say, "God, it's Paul.
Yeah.
And it used to annoy Dad. So with me, I was, just, I don't know. I didn't really think much of it. But looking at pictures of him now, I think, God, yeah, I can see why he thought that. So yeah. And
Yeah,
then
it's a lot of trauma to be. The reason I asked that question, it just crossed my mind that I wonder, because there was all that pent up trauma that wasn't really processed, whether any of that was almost unwittingly projected towards you because of the visual resemblance. Does that make sense?
maybe.
Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, growing up, I was brought up in Henlow, which is a small village. Nan and Grandad, as I say, they were in London, and eventually they moved up to be closer to Mum and Dad, because Mum was married previously, and so was Dad. So
Okay.
when my mum and dad came together, I came along year or so later. So I had two brothers. One was 6, one was 3. There's 3 years between all of us.
Right.
And a sister who was, with from Dad's first marriage. So it's kind of a ready-made family sort of thing. And we grew up in Henlow. And growing up, probably age 13, 14, I knew I was different. Looking back when I was, with my mates and that at school, I knew I felt differently. I felt sort of a closeness to them.
Yeah.
They were all interested in girls. I had no interest in girls. They used to frighten me. I was frightened to talk to them.
Worry, mate. They are frightening.
And I knew deep down, by the ages sort of 14, 15, I knew I was gay.
Yeah.
And it terrified me. It absolutely terrified me. Back then, small village, the history of what had gone on with my uncle.
Of course, yeah.
The culture at the time. My dad was a tradesman. He was an electrician.
Right.
He was quite involved in politics. He was quite right wing. And, having a gay son wasn't really on his radar. So, that was tough when he found out about me.
How long did you sort of keep it to yourself?
Well, I still don't know if and when I ever would have told them, but I was it was found out.
Right.
Because I think I was 17. I went to a bar in Luton, and I think it was a copy of the Pink Paper or something like that. It was a publication. And I picked it up and took it home. I actually put it in my glove compartment in the car.
Okay.
I had a little black Nova SR. I was 17,
I remember the
18.
Novas,
I'd just passed my test, and that was the first car that I got.
Yeah.
And thought nothing else of it. And it went in for an MOT. So Dad picked me up and said, "I'll take you back to get your car." And we've got in the car, and there's this silence. And I thought, this feels weird. And Dad said to me, "I found that magazine in your car." And I thought, I'd completely forgotten it was there. And I said, what magazine's that? And he said, bloody gay magazine, Gay Times or Pink, whatever it was. And my blood run cold. I was like, oh my God, I completely forgot it was there. And we drove in complete silence, and my brain was racing, thinking, how can I get out of this? How can I deny it? And I did. I told a lie. I said, it's a friend of mine. He put it there. It's not me. I'm not. And he pulled the car over and he said, look, you're my son. I love you. But I don't want to see or hear anything about this. And that was that. I picked up my car, I went home, and I think for the next 2 years, we never spoke about it. And he never looked me in the eye for 2 years.
Oh, man.
So that was, and Mum never spoke about it. Dad must have said something to Mum. And it just sort of went, everything went very quiet. And I thought, I'm living at home. I can't live the life I want to live, even though I did, I still went out. It's funny, actually, after 2 years, so I'd come out, but we never spoke about it. It was just something that was swept under the carpet. And then I jumped back, I'd come out of the closet, and then I jumped back in because I actually met a girl.
Right.
Bizarrely. It was just somebody. I mean, I was really friendly with her, and we used to go out to gay pubs, gay clubs, and we got closer and closer, and we ended up being together. It was quite strange, and we were together a year.
Okay.
But I remember going home to my parents, and I'm kind of thinking, I've got to tell them now that I'm with a girl.
Yeah.
So I did. I just came out with it. I said, look, I've met a girl. She actually had a child. I think I was 19. She was about the same age. She had this little girl who was just under a year old, and my dad's attitude to me changed.
Really?
You know, he's like, I'm really pleased, I'm really happy. You know, and she used to come. A little girl had come, and you know, everything was okay. I'd pretty much moved out of home. I was staying with her a lot. Another friend of mine who lived in Bedford, and we lasted about a year. She used to like going out and clubbing. She was seeing other people, and I found out. And I was genuinely very fond of her.
Yeah.
Quite heartbroken when it finished, but I'm glad it finished, because you know I know a lot of people that go into a relationship for the wrong reasons, and I think for me it was to.
Well, you hear it.
It was to be normal. It was to conform.
You hear it so much, though, don't you? You hear about people coming out as gay and later life, and they've got the wife and the kids, and they've gone through the whole procedure of you know what society tells you is right and will lead to happiness and is success, as it were. It's always worth pointing out that the generational thing, like things were so different. I mean, I'm 40, and I think I'd be right in saying that sort of being gay now is probably the most accepted socially or in society in the UK as it's ever been. But I mean, it was so different even when 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It was still, I mean, it was out there, as it were, but it still was frowned upon in certain circles. I think now the people that frown upon it are frowned upon. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm sure those pockets of society still exist.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but it is looked down upon by the likes of me. You know, I would look down, because genuinely, I mean, my outlook on life is whatever. Do you know what I mean? As long as you're out there, you're happy, you're not hurting anyone, do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at in life. But I know it's changed drastically just to my sight. I don't know, maybe over the last 10 years or so. But I can only begin to imagine. I'm sorry you went through that, because I can only imagine what it would be like to try to suppress who you are because of disapproval from your parents, who are your caregivers. They're the ones that are there, that are meant to look after you and provide for you and sort of accept you unconditionally. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's the unconditional love that you are meant to have from your parents, but when that condition is put on it, I can only imagine the well, I don't have to imagine it, actually, to be fair. I've got my own sort of traumas and issues, but it's I can only imagine how having to suppress that and try and be somebody that you're not for a long period of time would be ultimately damaging. And was that when you started drinking?
Yeah, I mean, I left home. I mean, one thing I will say, you know, my parents didn't, you know, they weren't doing wrong. You know, they didn't know. I mean, it must have been, you know, I can talk at length about how hard it was for me, and it affected me right up until that picture I saw you. You know, I carried that. It was shame. You know, it was a deeply rooted sense of shame, because, you know, keep it to yourself. Don't tell anyone. You know, you don't talk to anyone about it. Don't tell the neighbours.
It's you being told from a very young age that what you are is wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, and the one thing that shame does, I was listening to, there's a book called Velvet Rage. And it talks about shame and how it, you know, the effects it has. And shame makes you want to hide. You know, with anger, you want to lash out. With sadness, you want to reach out. But with shame, you want to run away and hide. And alcohol, what better way to hide than, you know, in the drink?
Yeah.
And all that shame, all that low self. I mean, my self-esteem, it's always been an issue. That the no validation, basically. You're not good enough. And when I drank, started drinking regularly when I was sort of 16, 17. By the time I moved out, I think I was 19. I was drinking all the time, and it completely changed the way I felt. I wasn't confident. When I drank, I felt confident.
Right.
I was shy. When I drank, I wasn't shy. I've always been very conscious about the way I look. We were talking about that, self-consciousness.
Yeah.
When I drank, that it all went away. I loved the way
It made you feel.
alcohol made me feel. Just loved it. Some people don't. It doesn't work for some people, but for me,
Yeah.
it completely changed my perception of reality, and I loved it. I loved the taste of it. I loved the whole drinking culture. I loved pubs. And I moved to Bedford. I moved in with a drug dealer. Actually, I didn't know he was a drug dealer at the time. Bless him. Yeah, it was a lot of. It was amphetamine back then.
Right.
Not coke. It's like the poor man's cocaine, amphetamine. But yeah, there was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of partying, a lot of craziness.
It goes hand in hand, mate, doesn't it? I mean, alcohol's a great inhibition breaker, which you've mentioned, but I can resonate with what you're saying about, and still to this day, there's, so my dad's a drinker, and I was raised around that. And so I've always been very hyper conscious of myself, because there's a part of me where my own first reaction to hard times, adversity, is reach for a drink.
Yeah.
Because there is that, say, beautiful. There's that beauty about alcohol where you can have a shit day, and you know that if you go and drink X amount of alcohol, that it will switch that off.
Yeah.
That whatever is going on in you, like you said, it's an escape. That's making me uncomfortable over there. I want to run away from that. Where can I run to? And you know that whether you open that bottle or that can or whatever, after a certain point in time, that problem will go away for a little bit. Yeah. But that's the point. It never goes away. Yeah. It masks it until tomorrow, and then tomorrow you wake up feeling like shit with the problem still there. Yeah. But I can resonate myself. I've always been, as I say, very conscious, and there's been times in my life where I've maybe started to lean on that as a coping mechanism, but I've always had the alarm bell going off in my head, going, Russ, where are you going, mate? Come on, like, you've seen this. And look, fortunately for me, touch wood, I've always pulled away from it. And like now, I drink now personally, but I don't drink a fat lot, if I'm honest. So, but just sort of sharing that with you, I can understand how you'd go in that direction.
Yeah, it was nothing. It wasn't planned. It wasn't. I mean, funnily enough, both my brothers have had problems with alcohol as well.
Right.
I mean, my eldest brother, who's a builder, he's a heavy drinker, and he has been for many, many years. Another dimension to that, being, growing up thinking I was wrong. We went out. I think I'd moved out, and I went back home at Christmas, and we all went to the pub. And obviously my brother knew about me by then, and me and my brother are completely different. He came up to me at the bar and said, I don't like what you are. I'll never accept it. I think it's disgusting. He said, you go your way and I'll go my way. And I was like, wow. Okay. I said, yeah, okay, mate, no problem. Wow. And we've had a difficult relationship since then. At times, I thought over the years he softened, but then I think, oh, maybe he has softened a little bit. I mean, for instance, when I lived with, Matt and I lived together for a period. My brother came over to do some work, And I said to Matt, I said, he probably won't talk to you. And Matt said, oh, I'll be fine. I'll go and make him a cup of tea. And he went outside and said, hello, John, like what you're doing, and would you like a cup of tea?
Mm.
And my brother completely ignored him. He didn't even acknowledge him. And Matt offered again, and he just completely blanked him. And he came back in and he said, he completely ignored me. He didn't even speak to me.
Mm.
And then he said to me afterwards, he said, tell your mate, don't come and offer me cups of tea. And I was like, wow. Yeah.
I don't even know what to say to that, to be honest, Glenn. Like, I don't know how to be rejected the way that rejection would have been just for being who you are. And for something as obviously as so small as like your sexual preference, your sexual preference doesn't make you who you are. It doesn't, define anything about you other than that one small element.
Yeah.
So to deal with that level of rejection, I'm sorry to hear that, mate. I think that's really sad.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of turn it around the other way, you could imagine me going to him and saying, I don't accept you being straight. Don't accept you having kids. Don't accept your relationship. Don't accept your, it's like, you're invalidating my whole life, my very existence. Even though, it's not central to who I am, but it's a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
And to have it kind of rubbished and trounced like that by your own brother, that was
difficult. I can imagine. That's probably a huge understatement, mate. I just don't know what other words to put on that.
Yeah, and we've worked together since then. And we just it's kind of we just never talk about it. We get on with work, and we haven't worked together for a few years, but and I used to listen to him talking, and I think he's quite bigoted, so he's obviously not. I think he's not changed, and he's not going to change, But
yeah. You can't force people to change, unfortunately, can you? It's just then, unfortunately, the impact that's had on you moving forwards, and potentially one of the ingredients that led you to where you were led. So when you started leaning into drinking and that kind of thing, and I guess early 20s, because I mean, you showed me that picture. You said you were 41.
Yeah, that was 41. I mean,
so we're talking 20 years of.
Yeah, I moved. As I say, I was a regular drinker by the time I was 19. I think I was just thinking work-wise, what I actually did. I've done quite a few different jobs.
All the while with drinking in the background.
All the while with drinking in the background. I think there were 2 years from sort of 19 to 21. I didn't really do a lot. I was always involved in buying and selling and wheeling and dealing. So I did that for a couple of years. But yeah, drinking had become a sort of a daily thing. We just every night we went to the pub.
Right.
And by the age of 23, I was sat in an AA meeting.
Okay.
A bit dazed and confused. I mean, for instance, we'd go out at the weekend. We'd go, me and my mates, we'd go out on a Friday night. We'd all get drunk, and then we'd go out again on a Saturday night, and we'd go clubbing. We'd go to London, Birmingham, wherever, Leicester, and we'd all get drunk. And then Sundays, my mates would stay in. I used to go back to the pub for Sunday lunch. This was the pub in Bedford, the Barley Mow in Bedford. And back then, I think they still had licensing laws, so they'd close at 3:00.
Yeah.
And I'd go on to there was a hotel in Bedford that always used to do after hours. So at 3:00, they'd draw the curtains and they'd serve until 6, 7, whenever it was they used to open up again.
When the pubs reopened, yeah.
And I'd carry on. And then I'd carry on Monday as well. I wouldn't work on Monday. Not all the time, but when I was on a bender, as I used to call them, and these would last all weekend and then spill over into the week. And I'd kind of still be in the pub on a Tuesday afternoon, and I'd think, what is wrong with me? Why am I doing this? I don't want to be here. I don't. And I used to talk to my friends about it, and they're like, "What are you doing, Glenn? Why don't you go back to work on a Monday? We've had a good weekend, we've had a good Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
Why do you have to go and ruin it by carrying on?" Hence why I went to AA. And it's quite bizarre sitting in an AA meeting at 23, still very young. And I used to say to I was very nervous about going, and I'd get talking to people afterwards, and I'd say, "I'm not sure. I think I might be an alcoholic." And they've got this like beginners pamphlet that they
Beginner's
give you.
guide
Beginner's
to being an
guide.
alcoholic.
Yeah, the starter pack.
Yeah, that's it. Alcoholism for dummies.
The newcomers pack.
Yeah.
That's what it was called.
Right. That sounds a bit better than one.
Yeah. The Dummy's Guide to Alcoholism. Yeah. So I read through it, and there was a questionnaire, and it was 20 questions. So I started ticking the boxes, and I think I answered 19 out of 20 questions.
Right.
And I thought, well, there you go. I've got one wrong. I can't be an alcoholic. And then I read at the bottom, it said, if you've answered yes to 3 or more of these questions, there are, the chances are you may have you may be an alcoholic. You may have a problem with drink. And I kept, I was like, I can't be an alcoholic. I'm 23. I'm still having way too much fun.
Do you know what? So it's a good point there that you've made, because I think there is a perception that to be an alcoholic, you have to be middle-aged.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of youngsters out there that I think, particularly what would have been your generation, what would have been my generation, like weekend partying was culture. The lad culture, as it were, was going out drinking every weekend. Not so much now, but I think once the partying stops, if you're just drinking for drinking, that was when you were seen as being an alcoholic. But that's potentially, there's not enough light actually shone on the younger generation that party and then can't stop the drinking off the back of the partying, which sounds like it would have been where you would have gone.
Well, I mean, back then, you go to, I don't go to fellowship meetings now. I went to, that's why I can talk about it, because one of the traditions of any of the 12-step fellowships is you're meant to be anonymous at the level of press, radio and film.
Oh, really?
So if I was still a member of AA, I wouldn't be able to come in here and say my name and talk openly. You'd have to blank my face up, basically.
Haven't learned how to do that, Glenn, so it's a good job that you'd have to hold the pillow.
I'd have to wear a balaclava.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
But if you go to a meeting now, the last meeting I went to was about a year ago. If you go to a meeting now, there are a lot of younger people coming through.
Really?
Yeah. And a friend of mine, she found recovery a good few years ago, but she was only 21. So it is possible, and you go to meetings now and you'll see 19, 20-year-olds picking up a year chip, and you think, wow, how on earth did you do that? I mean, I at 23, I knew there was a problem.
I can only imagine it's because the society culture's changed a lot. You've only got to look on your normal high street at all the pub closures, the nightclub closures, unless you go into a city now. A lot of places are more eateries, aren't they? Like food places that do cocktails, kind of. The pub culture has took a beating in the UK. So maybe that's why. Maybe it's not so socially. It's not the social norm for that younger generation now to go out all weekend drinking. I think so. Perhaps that's maybe a good thing.
Yeah,
that it gets identified and that. Because it's not a norm of behaviour. I look at some of my own behaviour, say in my early 20s. I was, I guess, your stereotypical lad. So football, rugby, worked, self-employed. But the weekend wasn't a weekend if I didn't go out. And there was definitely a time in my life where we used to go out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because there would be a student night in one city on the Thursday, a student night on a Monday, and we'd go out drinking for 4 or 5 days straight.
Yeah.
But there were 20 of us doing it.
Yeah.
So it was normal. So how could we have a problem if everyone's doing it? And I guess being able to step back or not, that's where,
Yeah.
you know, some people fall down.
That was it with me. I mean, I was, I could stop. That was the thing when I went to AA. I mean, I got friendly with this chap there, and he kind of took me under his wing a little bit, and we exchanged numbers, and we kind of spoke in between meetings. And I used to say to him, I can't be an alcoholic. I can stop. And he used to smile and look at me, and he's like, yeah, but what happens when you start again? You know, because I'd kind of, it was the control part of it that I was struggling with. You know, once I always used to get drunk. I never used to go to the pub and have 2 or 3. I always used to end up getting drunk.
Yeah.
So it was when I started drinking, I lost control of it. And there were periods where I would drink every night of the week, and I'd go to work. But there were periods where I'd completely go off the rails and go on a bender. I mean, some of the benders would last a week.
Mm.
You know, sometimes I'd be drinking in the morning.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I'd get up in the morning. That's not normal.
No.
You know, I'd drink when I was driving. You know, not drinking and driving. I'd actually physically drink while I was driving.
Right.
You know, I'd have a can of Stella in between my legs. You know, in my 20s. I've only ever heard that at an AA meeting.
Really?
You know, that's not. When I used to drive around, and I'd have this can in between my legs, and I'd you know, if you pulled up in traffic, I can't have a swig. You know, so I'd time it to have swigs between passing other cars. You know, that's not normal behaviour.
No, no, it's not.
But the thing I didn't want to accept that I was an alcoholic, because I was still having way too much. I was too young. I was having way too much fun. But the thing that used to jolt me back to, I mean, I'd turn up drunk at meetings.
At AA meetings.
AA meetings, yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's not, you know, it's you know, when I finally sort of got sober, and you know, I was a prolific meeting attender. I probably went to 6-7 meetings a week, you know, and you would get people turn up drunk. You know, there's nothing to say that you can't go.
Yeah.
When you've had a few drinks, they usually ask you not to talk. They say, if somebody has had a drink today, can you not speak during the meeting? You know, the last thing you want to do is listening to a drunk rambling on for you know, half of the meeting. But it was the consequences. It wasn't the drinking so much. It was the consequences of the drinking that eventually got me to do something about it. But it always used to take me back to the meetings.
What were the consequences?
I mean, you know, in the early days, you know, they were almost sort of comical, but they became more and more dangerous and more pathetic, really. I mean, for instance, one time I was in Derby. A good friend of mine lived in Bedford. He moved to Derby. He was a big drinker. And I used to go and stay with him for 3 or 4 days. And we always used to get on the wine. And I think I'd been there 3 days, and I was skint. I had no money left. And we were drinking in the nearest pub to where he lived. It was called the Roebuck in Derby. And I had no money left. And I was going to go back to his and then go home the following day. And I got playing pool. I've always been a good snooker player and a good pool player. And I was playing these guys, and I said to one of them, do you fancy playing for a few quid? So I think we started at £5 a game, and it kept going. And I think it got up to 80. He was £80 up.
Right.
And I said to him, double or I think they were travellers, and there was a group of them.
Well, yeah.
I said, double or quits.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, are you good for, you know, have you got the money on you? And I was like, yeah, God, of course I have, you know. I was a good blagger. I said, of course I have. And I went to the toilet, and I thought, please God, let there be a window that I can get out of.
Yeah.
And I went to the toilet, and I squeezed out of this window.
Oh, you did,
my mate was still sitting there.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully, no harm come to him. But I squeezed myself out of this window, and you know the little pips that you put the handle on?
Yeah.
It went, I pulled myself out the window, and it cut me all the way down my stomach.
You know.
T-shirt all ripped. And I went and got in my car and drove home. After drinking 3, I must horrendously over the limit. Absolutely shameful behaviour. But things like that, you kind of get home and you think, well, that was quite funny. But
becomes a war story, doesn't it? That's the thing. I've been around it.
Yeah.
I've been around it, Glenn, and all sorts of things. Crashed cars, and when you're between lads and mates that drink, and I think the culture then did have something to blame. But they would become the funny story, the fables, the tales around the barbecue or the fire pit. You know what I mean? The catch ups, and I remember when that happened a few years ago. When you actually break it down and look at it, it's like, Jesus Christ, that was pretty bad. Because like you say, a lot of the time it's those knife edge moments. Because what could have happened there was. You could have not got out the window and had your head kicked in. You could have been caught going out the window. You could have fell out the window and seriously, you could have broken your neck, broken your back. There's all these could haves, which gladly didn't happen. But it kind of encourages the next one to happen, doesn't it?
Well, that was it. I mean, I did actually ring my friend 3 or 4 days later, and I said to him, "I'm really sorry about that." And he couldn't even remember. He said, "Oh, there were some people who were a bit cross that you disappeared," but I think, well, thankfully they didn't try and get the money out of him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that was a funny story. It went on from there. I was drinking in Bedford one day, and I was going to go home, and I went round to the bus station in Bedford, dead opposite the police station, and I went into the toilets there, and these 3 guys had followed me from the pub. And basically a homophobic attack. One of them came up to me and said something, and I actually hit him. And then somebody hit me from behind. There was somebody waiting in one of the cubicles, and I was really, really badly beaten. I was in hospital for about a week. Cracked a couple of ribs, perforated eardrum. I had a footprint on the side of my head. They said where they'd been stamping on your face. The consultant said, "You're really lucky. You haven't got a fractured skull." And I remember I left the hospital, and I looked like the Elephant Man. I was a real mess, And when the police actually came round, they were more interested in how much I had to drink, what I was doing there, what I'd said to them. So I didn't say anything to them. They came up to me. But you hit him first. I was like, well, yeah, he was saying, he was basically being horrible to me. And they didn't have any, no interest.
Really?
In the police, yeah. These two young lads, they were,
Do you think that was like homophobia on behalf of the police?
Yeah. I think so. I think it took them after. I remember my mum and dad were there, and I was kind of saying to them, can you come back in 10 minutes so I can just, and they were like, well, no, it wasn't dealt with very well. And eventually they looked into it. They said, we'll be in touch when we investigate it. I think after a month, I got a phone call to say they were investigating the case that day. Dead opposite the police station, CCTV footage everywhere. And they came back and said there was no evidence. They were going to drop the case.
Christ, mate.
And again, that took me back to AA.
Yeah. So that was a moment. So you were drunk. You were drunk at the time of the attack.
Yeah.
And then that inspired you to go again. I need to change this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But then I'd go back to AA, and I'd stay sober for a few weeks. I'd be picking up chips, a month chip. And then my head would be telling me, you had more fun than, that was just it will be different this time, to justify going back and drinking again. And then there was a time when I'm the most placid person you could ever meet. there's not, there's not a harmful bone in my body.
Mm.
I'd been out drinking one day again with friends. It was a Sunday, and I remember waking up and I was in a paper suit in a police cell,
Right.
and I was covered in blood, and all the skin on my knuckles was gone. I was aching all over, and I was kind of coming round, and I thought, where the hell am I? And I had these foam slippers on, a paper suit, and you sort of coming round, and it took me a few minutes to think, shit, I'm in a police cell. What have I done? So I got up and I started banging on the door, spoke to the copper, and he said, you're going to be interviewed soon. We've actually recovered the weapon, and closed the hatch down again. I've never been so frightened in all my life.
So you'd completely blacked out.
I was completely blacked out. To this day, I've got no recollection about what happened. I remembered going out. I was laying there thinking, what on earth? What? Where did it start? What did we do? I remember going out. I remember having a meal. I remember going to the pub. I remember singing karaoke. I remember us all sitting at the bar, and that's it. Absolute blank from then on. What happened was I carried on drinking. My mates went home, and they all said to me, come on, Glenn, time to go. And they said it was like you'd glazed over. You were carrying on drinking. The copper interviewed me, and he said basically you'd got a taxi, you'd gone home, there'd been some sort of row about the fare.
Right.
I'd gone inside, and I'd come out with a hammer, and I'd gone to attack him with a hammer, and he'd slammed the door. He slammed the taxi door as I hit the door, and broke a few of the windows, and he drove off. And I threw the hammer up the road after the taxi. It ended about 20 houses up the road. And when the copper was telling me this, I just can't believe it. Cannot believe it. And I remember the interview. It was a fairly young lad, copper, interviewing me. And I remember saying to him, it was quite cold in the room, and he only had a shirt on, and I was shivering. I remember saying to him, do you want to go and put a top on? You look quite cold. And he sort of looked at me a bit strange. And after he'd interviewed me, he said to me, you seem like a really nice guy. He said, you might, why don't you do something about your drinking? Because I'd said to him, this is just not me. It's not me. It's not me at all.
So where had the story that you told there, where had the blood and the loss of skin on the knuckles come from? Or do you not know?
I was arrested by about 10 police officers came around and arrested me.
Right.
And,
so you were trying to fight the police?
I fought them, basically.
Wow.
I do actually remember that. I remember laying in bed. I remember I heard a radio, and it was a police radio, and then somebody was in my doorway, and I told them to go away.
Politely, of course.
Politely,
yeah.
And he said to me, "Look, you need to come with us." And I wasn't compliant. And he said, "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," and I chose the hard way. So they fought me all the way down the stairs.
Right.
Hence why I was black and blue.
Yeah.
And when it was just a horrible, horrible situation. I was bailed. I went back home again. I remember it. I rang. It was Matt actually that picked me up. I rang Matt. I said, "Can you come pick me up?" I was still wearing these foam slippers. It was pouring down with rain. I was outside the police station.
Yeah.
I think that was the lowest
point.
I was charged with assault, possession of an offensive weapon, and criminal damage. And I went to court, however many weeks after that. And I said to the solicitor, I said, look, I'm doing something about my drinking. I'm going back to AA. That's good. I'll say that. That
Yeah.
you'll adhere to any. She said they'll probably give you a drinking treatment order where you're basically, that's part of your sentence that you don't drink, and that's what happened. I got a year's probation and a drinking treatment order, so I used to have to go once a week.
It's that knife edge again, Glenn, isn't it? Because I mean, God forbid, but if you'd have hit the taxi driver with a hammer, or injured a police officer, that would have seen you behind bars. So
I dread to think.
Yeah,
I dread to think. I mean, it's it was it was, but that wasn't the end. You'd think. I mean, you think that would be enough.
I don't know, mate. So everyone's heard of self-harm. I think there's many ways to self-harm, and some self-destructive behaviour like that, I believe, is self-harm.
Yeah.
For me, again, to sort of share with you a little bit of what I mean by that. So I spent, and I've said this many times on the podcast, but I spent a period of my life, 4 years, working as a bailiff. And there were many, many times in that period of my life where I put myself deliberately in harm's way. Looking back now and reflecting, I can see that. And I refer to that period of my life, or certain periods there, as self-harm, because there were things I did and positions I put myself in that were completely negligent of my own safety, and I genuinely did not give a shit. I had no value to my own life at that point. At sometimes, I don't know. I kind of know why now, looking back. But I look back, and my son was only little at the time as well, and it's horrible to think, that some of the actions could have left him without a dad.
Yeah.
But I look back at that now as self-harm, not in the traditional sense in terms of physically harming myself, but putting myself in positions that would have constituted, the risk of harm or actual harm. Kind of sounds a little bit like where you were going.
Yeah.
It's that the drinking, that was self-harm.
Yeah.
You were harming yourself through alcohol.
I was in pain.
Yeah.
I was in a lot of pain, and that's why now I don't use I don't refer to myself as an alcoholic, sort of jumping forward a bit, because I don't find it helpful. I look at myself back then, and I think I was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I was suffering a great deal, and I used alcohol it was my medicine. I used alcohol to numb that pain. I stopped drinking for a while after that, but because I wasn't doing anything about what was wrong with me, I didn't know. I didn't have a clue. I mean, it's taken 10 years of a lot of work, a lot of therapy. The 7 years in AA was invaluable. I heard a lot of stories, and it resonated with me.
Yep.
And a lot of people, the circumstances are different, but the emotions are similar. So until I could actually heal that pain inside me, I was going to carry on drinking. I was always going to go back to the medicine, what made me feel better.
It's the thing, isn't it? You can treat the symptom, which is the drinking, but if you never address the cause, it's always going to be there and always going to cause. It can manifest in other ways, but you have to always seek out and treat the cause if you're looking for long-term, recovery in any way, shape, or form, really. Not just alcoholism, many other things in life. If you never address the cause, your symptoms, you might cure one symptom, but it will manifest somewhere else. So it's really important to be fair. If you're looking at any kind of self-destructive behaviour, and within construction, it's such a big one. There's a huge drink and drugs culture. It's that we work hard, we party hard. you know, and it's that kind of like Larry construct, you know what I mean? It's the alpha male lads down the pub. Yeah, you pint after work, which is okay. I'm not shutting that down if it's done in a non-harmful manner.
It's when it becomes a problem.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you you know, it's that, I mean, somebody said to me once, when does it become a problem? And they said it's when it starts to cost you more than the price of the drink. And I thought that was a great bit of advice.
Yeah, true.
Because it was, you know, I mean, all these, you know, situations like that, you know, I've now got a criminal record.
Yeah.
I mean, you were saying about, you said in one of your podcasts a little while ago, you know, you see the guy outside a pub that's trying to fight the world and he's swinging punches and, you know, that's a man that's in pain.
Yeah.
But most people look and think,
dickhead.
What a dickhead.
Yeah. And it is, mate. It's a great analogy, and I heard it somewhere else, so I haven't come up with it myself. But just to repeat it, it's when you see a woman out on the street crying, and that people will rush up and comfort them. Are you okay? What's the matter? What's going on? But like you just said, the man that's gone out on a Friday night, drunk a skinful of beer, and decided to fight the world.
Yeah.
What a dickhead. What a dickhead. But the reality is that quite often is a male version of that breakdown. The screaming and the crying. It's an aggressive showing of emotion.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it is a showing of emotion. You know, and that unfortunately is one of the problems of being a man. You know, not only do we not deal and cope with emotions as expressively, but we don't understand it either. You know, aggression is often dealt with aggression. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing. One of the best things I've done in my life is study psychology, because I just see everything with a different set of eyes. And that is me now. If I were to see that man in the street wanting to fight everybody, my first instance would be, I wonder what's gone on there.
Yeah.
What's happened to him today, yesterday, the last year that has caused that reaction?
Yeah.
You know, rather than just, what a prick, you know.
2 weeks ago, I was in a travel lodge and I went down to breakfast and it was a Holiday Inn. It's like a buffet breakfast. And I've walked in and there's only me and this other guy in the breakfast area. And I've gone over, I'm probably from here to that light away. I'm a good 6 foot away from him. And I've put a slice of toast in the toaster. And he started screaming at me. He said, get out of my personal space. And he's basically launched into this tirade of verbal abuse at me.
Yeah.
And I've stood there and I've immediately thought, the guy's not well.
Yeah.
You know,
it's an abnormal reaction.
He was staring at the wall. He was screaming at me. At first I thought, is he talking to me? So I've sort of moved away and I've gone back again, and he's turned around and looked at me, and he started screaming and shouting at me. And I stood there and I thought, right, I think I'm going to have to, I said to him, look, if I've offended you, I didn't mean to come into your personal space. I was nowhere near his personal space. I said, I apologise. I didn't mean to do it. I'm very sorry. And I moved away, but he wouldn't stop. He carried on. And I went and sat down. And I thought, if he comes over, I'm just going to have to go. I'm just going to walk up to the reception and just, you know, either go behind reception, remove myself from the situation. And he did. He sat down at the table next to me and carried on shouting abuse. And thankfully, he slammed his tray down and got up and left. 20 years ago, I probably would have reacted very differently. But I thought, the guy's not well.
Yeah.
The guy is seriously unwell. And when I went to check out, the guy behind the counter said, I'm really sorry about that. He said you were brilliant. He said you apologize. He said no need to apologize. And he'd seen it. I looked over and I could see him looking, and he said to me, I didn't want to come and interfere because I thought you didn't, because you were scared. I was scared.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know whether this guy was going to physically attack me but I said to him, look, these things usually they usually burn themselves out,
They do, but
Thankfully it did. But, it's somebody who's,
mm,
and as you say, you see somebody like that. I mean, I dare say 90% of the population would think, what an absolute,
yeah,
and tell him, would have given him a mouthful.
yeah.
I don't know where it would have ended up. But
That's the frightening thing.
I think when you
Yeah.
understand your own suffering, you start to see the
Mm,
suffering in other people as well. It makes you more compassionate.
yeah.
It makes you more, not forgiving, but you understand, you with your background in
Glenn,
psychology.
it's one of the important things about the raising awareness around mental health, because once you can start to understand and accept mental health, it gives you that perspective. That your situation there, the 25, 30-year-old version of me would have probably decided, okay, we're going to fight then.
Yeah.
That would have been my initial reaction, whereas now my reaction would be similar to you, like, whoa, what's gone on here?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that individual then is going to go out and probably repeat that behaviour until they get the reaction they're seeking, which might be that self-destructive behaviour of, I'm going to initiate a situation, because underneath it all, they're looking for that. They're looking for that conflict, that, whatever it might be that satisfies their current situation, they're going to go and seek it elsewhere. What we can do to raise awareness, and it's that thing, isn't it? You can't help everybody. Can't help everybody, but the reason behind these podcasts is, if it just helps one person might have listened to what you've just said, and the next time they're in that position, go, just look at it from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why men make up 75% of all suicides in the UK. Because we're not as expressive. We're not, because again, to highlight that point, that was his expression of some variety of pain and trauma that he was experiencing, and whether it's poor mental health or a mental illness even. But if that was a female that was maybe sat at the table crying over their breakfast, very different reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Can I go to the loo?
Yeah, of course, mate. Of course. No, hold it and stay there.
I've been holding it for about 10 minutes. But
Do you know what? I'm actually on the same sort of timeline where I was thinking I've maybe got 10 minutes in me. So yeah, we'll cause this. We'll tap the brakes right here.
I'll go first.
You go first. And we're back. Pit stop, part 2. So Glenn, where were we, mate?
Where were we?
We were at the depths, I think. You were talking about the recent sitting down for breakfast with a chap across from you who was probably struggling. But
that was that was a recent thing.
Let's go back to, so we'd got as far as the incident with the police.
Yeah.
And you said that wasn't enough to stop you. So how much further along, I guess, what happened, or what was the time frame where coming through to the point where you did, like, what did stop you, or how much is there in between there and the point where you did stop?
I mean, I had a shop for 10 years.
A shop,
yeah. From the age of 23, it was a 10-year lease that I signed.
Oh wow!
And it was a watch shop.
Okay.
I used to sell watches, jewellery. We used to do a lot of repairs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I did that for 10 years, and then I did a lot of heavy drinking over that period. And I think that people used to say to me, you get away with it, Glenn, because you can, I had my own business. I could close, I think the most I closed was a week.
Right.
I shut the shop on a Saturday, and I didn't turn up again until the following Saturday. So I'd been on the drink for a week.
Yeah.
But then there'd be periods where I'd stop drinking. I remember I had a big wall chart calendar at the back of where I used to sit behind this display cabinet, and I used to tick the days that I didn't drink, and I'd cross the days that I drank. So there'd be big periods of tick, 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 cross, tick, cross, and then it'd be all crosses. So I did that for 10 years. I used to get the shakes as well. Another consequence of drinking. I used to get the jitters, which is not good for somebody that does watch repairs.
Yeah.
So I've got this glass counter that I used to I'd sit behind, and the customers would come in with their watch, give it to me, and I'd take, I used to do batteries. I'd do it all in front of them. I'd change the strap, take batteries out, take links out, do small repairs. And when I started to get the shakes, I redesigned the whole shop. So I put a screen, and my little workbench was behind the screen. Because you imagine you took your watch in, and someone's going like that, trying to fix your gold Amiga, putting a new battery in it and whatever, and they've got the shakes. So
Wow,
that was the watch shop. I remember finishing there, and people saying you get away with it. You work for yourself. You need a vocation. You need something to, give you a purpose in life. And I'd always wanted. I was fascinated by criminal justice. I fancied joining the prison service. So filled out all the application forms.
Yeah,
passed the.
That's like a prison warden type.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, that is a bit of a change, isn't it?
Yeah, it fascinated me. And by this time, I hadn't got a criminal record. This was before the incidents that I was talking about. Just giving it a bit of chronology, as you say.
Or there'd be somebody watching, going, "How would he have done that with a criminal record?" Yeah.
So I passed all the tests. You have to go for a fitness test, the application form, and it got right down where to this day you had to go for role play. So there were 10 role play exercises you had to do. And it was at HMP Rochester in Kent, and I stayed sober for a period because I knew I had to pass the medical. And obviously, when I was drinking, my blood pressure was up here, and I had to get through the medical, which I did. Wasn't drinking, totally sober. Good few weeks. Went down to the role play interview type day. Booked into a little B&B. Few tradesmen in there. Got chatting to them and told them what I was doing. They were winding me up, and went out that evening. Thought I'll get something to eat, go back and have an early night. And I was looking at the pubs and I was thinking, no, I'm not drinking. Got to be up early. Got to be mentally fit and prepared for this. Long story short, I had a meal, walking back, saw these guys sitting in a bar, went into the bar, have a drink. Got in at 2 a.m. Went to the role play the following day. Must have stank of booze. Failed miserably. Didn't get the job. Then I saw an advert in the paper advertising for prisoner custody officers for Group 4. Did that, got accepted for doing the vans, the transportation from prison to the courts, etc. But because I did quite well during the training period, I thought there were 6 exams and I got 100% in every exam, which is, when I apply myself to something, I'm pretty good. And it fascinated me, and I was, and they said you need to be court based because you're not too clever, but you're bright. You need to be based in the courts. You need to know a little bit. You're working with the judges and the solicitors, and so I did that. That was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. There was a tunnel from the court cells to the police station, and we used to have to go over every morning and pick up the people that had been arrested. We get the HMP vans come in every day. Lot of aggro, we used to process about 25 prisoners a day, so there was always a lot of aggro and argy-bargy, and it's like that guy I was talking about in the travelling. I've seen 6'2" guys with like excited delirium, and you've got there's 6 of us holding them down. It was quite scary at times.
Can imagine.
Yeah, but I did that, but I continued to drink. It's going to sound terrible, but when the prisoners came over, they brought their medication with them.
Right.
And we had access to quite an amount of Valium, diazepam, temazepam, sleeping tablets. And when I first started, I said, what happens to those? And they said, well, they go back over to the police station. In the morning, you take a bag of all the medications. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take them home.
Yeah.
And I use that as a way of controlling my drinking.
Right.
I then became addicted to them, benzos.
Wow.
So I was getting home from work, and I reduced my drinking drastically because I knew I had to be up to work, go to work the following day.
Yeah.
Within 6 months, my boss had been fired. He'd released a prisoner in error, and they said to me, "Look, you're perfectly capable of running these cells. Do you want the job as the senior custody officer?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." So I was doing that, taking all the benzos back home with me, and
Christ.
that way I sort of controlled my my drinking. But by this time, I think Matt talked about selling the watches.
He touched on it, but
Yeah,
feel free.
by
if
this
you
time,
want to.
I'd started to sell fake watches.
Yeah.
More as a bit of fun, really, to start with.
Through your shop, or
Yeah,
not?
it was through the shop. So people would ask me, say, "Oh, can you get a fake Rolex?" And so I was like, I can do, but I'm not. I can't display them. So I started selling a few. And the rep always said to me, "Do you want to look at the stuff?" He always had a case full of them, and
Yeah.
so I just sort of gradually got into it. And when I was working at the
Because a good fake is not cheap, is it? That's
No,
the
it's
thing.
not.
We're not
And
talking
I-
tens and 20s.
yeah, and you were saying earlier about doing things. When you start doing something, you do it properly. I loved it. I loved it, and I got somebody to build me a website. I researched suppliers all over the world. The lesser quality ones I was buying from London, but I was buying from China, Malaysia, all over the world.
Wow.
And I found this guy in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He was drop shipping them for me, so I had the website.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, where this is going is the job at the court. I didn't have time for. My phone was in the drawer all day, and it was buzzing and buzzing and buzzing.
The
And I
irony,
thought,
you're working in the courts and selling fake watches.
I ended back up in the court.
Yeah.
On
On the other side.
On the other side. Yeah. When I ended up in court, you have to surrender to bail, and then you're in custody of the court. So you go into the dock. You have a dock officer comes there, searches you, and all the rest of it. I've gone there. My friend's walked out. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "You'll find out."
So tell me a bit more about how that all came about, though. Then, so you started selling fake watches. You brought that into your shop. You developed your website. You were doing drop shipping. How did all that fall apart? What went wrong there?
So I left the job at the court. I was there for 2 years, and I then basically started selling watches full time.
Right.
Frog in the throat. From my bedroom, basically. I had a computer in the bedroom.
So you weren't actually touching the watch. It was.
I'd start with I was.
Right.
But in the end, it became so busy. The guy from Malaysia said, "Look, it's going to flag up with customs if I keep sending stuff to your address.
Okay.
I'll drop ship them."
Yeah.
So to start with, I was, I had the stock at home, but as it built up, he was sending them directly to the customer. So I'd wake up in the morning, and there'd be, bearing in mind I was buying them for 25, I was selling them for 85, and I'd get up in the morning, there was like 30 orders. So I'd just sit there, put an email together, and yeah, this went on for 3 years.
Wow.
I was doing it.
That's a lot of watches, mate.
I remember, it was a lot of watches. I remember driving one day. I treated myself to a Jaguar XJ8, lovely midnight blue, cream leather interior. I had my cases of watches in the back. I used to drive around.
Got mad Dalboy vibes going on right now, mate.
I absolutely loved it, and I was good at it.
Yeah.
I had the most bizarre range of customers. 1 minute I'd be over in Earthlinborough on the Travellers site. There were 3 or 4 of them used to buy off me. and the next minute I'd be selling to a somebody who had a job in the city that had the originals, but they
Yeah,
used to say when we're in town, we don't want to wear the original. We want to wear a fake because we don't want to get it.
interesting.
We don't want to get a
Yeah.
wrist cut off. Um,
Out of interest, mate, a couple of sort of like slightly off to the left questions for you. What was the most common fake watch that people went for?
Rolex Daytona.
Okay.
Yeah, Rolex Daytona. I mean, in the end, on the website, I was selling Rolex, Breitling, Cartier, Patek Philippe, Constantine Vacherin, Hublot, Audemars Piguet, the whole range.
How easy is it to spot obviously yourself being a watchman, but to the normal public, how easy is it to spot the fakes?
I mean, for me, it's easy because it's quality. I mean, just picking up a watch, you can just feel by the finish and the edges.
Right.
You just get to know. But for a Joe Public, they couldn't. And I dare say a few of the models that I was, because there were different qualities. There were the £25 ones, but then I used to sell the what's called a Swiss ETA. So they're solid stainless steel. They've got a Swiss ETA movement. They've got they say they're sapphire crystal, but they were mineral crystal glasses. But
So it was a good watch.
Oh, everything. I mean, the dials were laser etched, as where the cheaper ones they were printed. You could, there was a huge difference in the quality. And really, I mean, even a watchmaker would probably have to, because even if you took the strap off, the serial number would be engraved on the case of the watch. But a watchmaker would have to remove the back to have a look at the movement.
Yeah.
To
identify it.
To spot it was a fake.
What is it? I mean, just so I like a watch. I haven't got. I can gather. I haven't got anything high end. I mean, mine. You'd probably laugh at my little humble collection. But what makes, just out of interest, like what makes these brands like your Rolexes, your Patek Philippe's, and stuff like that? What is it that makes them so valuable? Is it the name? Or is it that they actually have something about them that is phenomenal in comparison?
I mean, it's certainly with Rolex, it's the name, and it's they kind of. I mean, I don't think they're the best quality watch.
Really,
Rolex? No.
What would you say is the best quality?
I mean, the ones that are really popular now, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe. I think they always stood out for their.
They've got some real nice classic looking watches, haven't they?
Yeah. But Rolex, they've almost sort of created their own hype. So they sort of, a model becomes unavailable, therefore the value goes up. They're actually coming down in value now.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Oh, the last I heard was it was quite difficult to get them. There were waiting lists and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that, again, it sounds to me like manufactured demand.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the Submariner, the one with the green face, they call it the Hulk.
Yeah.
They actually discontinued it 2 years ago.
Right.
And a friend of mine from Northampton, he ordered one, and I think he paid 8,000-9,000 or something for it. And he said immediately it's worth double that.
Wow.
He said I could sell it for double that, but I won't. I'll keep it. I think they've come down a bit now. But yeah, I got I was very good at it. And I remember I was driving around. I was in my Jag. I was driving over to Henlow. Lovely sunny day. Plenty of money coming in. And I thought, I wonder, what would I do if it all went wrong? And how can it, how can it go wrong? But I just had a sort of I don't know whether it was an intuition or, I don't know. But anyway, I went home, and the lady that lived opposite come and knocked on the door, and she said, there's somebody looking at your house today. They were in a white van, and it looks as if they were taking pictures. And I thought, that's weird. I don't know. Didn't give it a second thought, but it was trading standards. They were watching me for about 3 months.
Right.
They were following me to the post office, taking pictures of me. They did
building a case.
They had a helicopter over the house.
Jesus Christ.
They were taking aerial photographs of the house. they were looking at me through. They even visited the place I worked. I'd taken a part-time when I left the court, when I was doing the watches. I better get a little part-time job, so I'm on the radar, sort of thing. They even came to the shop and I knew them when they finally knocked on the door that morning. I recognised them, and I actually, bizarrely, where their office was, it was next to a company called Anglia Home Improvements.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
And I thought they worked for them. So when they knocked at my door that morning,
you're like, no, I don't want any windows, mate.
I looked out, and I thought, there's those two guys. I was cleaning my teeth upstairs, and there was a bang, bang, bang at the door. And I looked out, and I thought, there's those two guys from Anglia Home Improvements. And either side of them were coppers.
Yeah.
And they all were wearing these black jackets, they're like the stab-proof jackets. And I looked out, I thought, it's a bit of a strong arm tactic to sell double glazing, And anyway, they said, get downstairs now. And they said, do you know anything about Swiss? The website was called Swiss Time Replicas.
Right.
Do you know anything about Swiss Time Replicas? And I said, well, yeah, it's my website. And that was it. My world turned upside down for 3 years.
I mean, I've got to say, Glenn, just to like my position on it, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the lovable rogues. Personally, I think selling a fake watch as a fake watch, I've got no problem with that, mate. It's fair game. Selling a fake watch as a real watch, and robbing somebody if you're trying to say, oh, this is a 10 grand watch, and you're selling it and it's a 25 quid watch, that's naughty. But if it's selling a fake as a fake and your website was selling fake, I'm assuming that's what you were doing at this point, I've got no problem with that. That's one of those, like, it's a bit like why everybody loved Dowboy.
Yeah.
Everyone knew that he was, wheeler, dealer, hooking, crooking, lovable rogue. I've got no problem against people trying to make money in that respect.
Well, I mean, one's fraud and very illegal, and you're deceiving somebody.
Yeah.
But the fact, and my argument always was, I'm selling them as a replica.
Yeah.
It couldn't be more explicit. Swiss Time Replicas.
Yeah.
That was never the argument. That was never the law that was in question. The law that was in question was, and the reason I'd got found out was, I remember I was in London doing a sightseeing tour with Mum and Dad. We were doing an open top bus around London, and my phone was ringing. And I spoke to this guy, and he said, "Can I have one of your brochures?" Because of course I had brochures printed. I was advertising in the Exchange and Mart, not the Exchange. Yeah, the Exchange. Remember the Exchange and Mart magazine? Yeah, it doesn't. It's
don't exist
no
anymore,
longer. But I used to advertise in there, and the wording was Swiss style timepieces, Submariners, Daytonas, Bentleys, because Breitling used to do the big Breitling Bentley. The calls I got from that advert had catalogues printed. I honestly, genuinely didn't think I was breaking the law. I always thought it's a grey area, possible civil case at worst.
Yeah.
But if anybody says anything, I'll just stop doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was stopped doing it that day. I was arrested. I mean,
Under what charges? What did they come at you with?
Trademark offences. Offences under the Trademark Act, 1990, whatever it was.
And that's actually a criminal offence rather than a civil.
No, it's a criminal offence. And by that stage, you've heard of the Proceeds of Crime Act, which was a legislation brought in by, I think it was Brown and Blunkett brought it in, and it was specifically to deal with terrorism and organised criminal gangs. That's what the legislation was for. But then they opened the umbrella.
Yep.
And there were people that were clocking cars. So they were then prosecuted under the Proceeds of Crime Act.
Yeah.
And it's what's the word? It's draconian.
I've got a mate that
it's evil. It's there for a purpose, but it will
There's been some changes recently, haven't there, I believe? Because the reason, and I won't go into details, but a friend of mine was essentially given a lifetime proceeds of crime judgment over a situation, which just seems ridiculous. You know, like it's severely affected him. I believe I had a conversation. He said they don't do that anymore, or they can't do it. There's like either a time period or a I don't know, a monetary value. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Don't know if it's changed. I mean, at the time, I was 2006. I was raided, and the final hearing was 2009. So I went through 3 years of, it was. I mean, that was really a catalyst to my rock bottom, because it consumed me. I became obsessed with, I knew more about trademark law than they did in the end, because I just, every day I got home from this little job that I had, and I would just study.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to somebody else who was also did a similar thing and was prosecuted in a similar way, who lived in Great Yarmouth. And me and him, we kept in contact, and we sort of met each other a few times. And he said, they're going to absolutely finish you, and he fought it, as I did. And in the end, we both had to plead guilty because the consequences were, so stark. I mean, I would have gone to prison.
Right.
I was told that. The barrister said to me, the final, went to Cambridge Crown Court, pleaded not guilty, went to trial, jury was sworn in. I mean, it was just surreal. I mean, I used to sit and take people up to the dock, and now I'm sitting there. And they flew in people from Rolex in Switzerland. They had, I think, Rolex, Patek Philippe, all the, they flew, and they paid for it all.
Yeah.
They paid for them to fly over from Switzerland and sit in on. I was running a website from my bedroom, and they're all sitting there on my trial. And after 3 days, basically, our defence was, because I put my foot in it in the original interview. I told the police everything on instruction from the solicitor, who was the duty solicitor that played golf with all the the other solicitors that were prosecuting and all the rest of it. They're all in it together, Yeah. And basically, he just said to me, the best thing to do is just hold your hands up and tell them everything they want to know, which I did. And the final barrister that I used, he said, your solicitor should be shot. He said, you should have said nothing. They didn't know what they don't know about trademark law and the consequences of what you were going to do. But anyway, after 3 days, the judge he was very fair. He said, look, you've got no defence in criminal law. You basically, what you were selling told a lie about themselves. And you were using their name to make money. It's theft. And he said, if you continue to plead not guilty and you're convicted, you tie my hands. You'll get the full force of the sentence, which the barrister said to me, you'll get 2 years in prison.
Right.
Or I can carry on fighting, which I feel you've been really harshly treated. I'll happily, but you can then go home, and I'm in a van going to prison. So, and I looked at my mum and dad. They were there every day of the trial, and I looked over at them, and I thought, oh, God, the stress is putting them through. I thought, that's it. Let's finish it now. So I pleaded guilty.
And what was the outcome? You don't have to say.
No, fine. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Obviously, you didn't go to prison.
I got a 2-year conditional discharge.
Right.
So the judge, stand up, Mr. Everard. The first thing he said, you've been a thoroughly dishonest man. And I thought, you've been a thoroughly dishonest man. And he said to me, if you come up before me, basically go away and keep your nose clean. He said, if you come up before me on similar charges, I'll have no hesitation in sending you straight to prison. But then we need to go on to the next part of the case, which is confiscation of assets. And basically, the trading standards were going for, I think it was 132,000, which they said was the benefit figure. The barrister said to me, he said, you're the most honest crook I've ever known, because you wrote everything down. When I kept records, they weren't very good records. I remember one entry was 3 geezers from Cambridge, 2 submariners, to this, to the other. I just wrote everything down because I wanted to keep an eye on.
And they got their hands on all this.
They took everything.
Oh,
They took my computer. The thing is, when you live, we lived on a residential street, quite a nice area, and you've got white police vans pulling up outside the house, and then you've got evidence bags coming out. They see 2 men living together. What do they think?
Yeah.
And there were a few people on the street that came up to Matt and said, "What the hell's going on?" And he said, "Well, he's selling fake watches." And they were like, "Really?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple of them never spoke to me again. Spoke to me again. Anyway.
Wow.
So yeah, then it went to confiscation hearing. It was like number crunching, and then they have to decide. This might be relevant with your friend. They then decide on a figure that you benefited from, and then they work out what you've got, what they can take. When it came to me, I owned my home, so they knew there was a big pot there they could take. But we, at the last minute, the money had come from my father. So we were saying that it was a loan from my father to me, so it can't be taken by trading standards. And in the end, we managed to get this handwritten note from a solicitor, which he'd taken at the local village solicitor, had written down. I advised my clients to do an agreement, which was a loan from father to son, and he dated it and everything, and we produced that. And the judge, who I think felt a little bit of sympathy for us, said, I think he thought trading standards were being a bit greedy. And he said, "Well, it's quite clear this was a loan from father to son, and it can't be taken by," because we'd made them an offer in the morning of £60,000 to carve, to settle.
Yeah.
And they refused it. And they said, "We don't do deals with criminals." So they dug their heels in, and they ended up, bearing in mind they were going for 132, we were offering 60, they got 33 in the end.
Right. Which is still a lot of money.
It's an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
And I didn't have it. Thankfully, Dad bailed me out.
Wow, man. What a journey.
Yeah. I remember the barrister coming out, and he went to shake my dad's hand. My dad was a businessman, and he said, "Oh, congratulations." And he looked at me and said, "Congratulations." He said, "I've got to write a cheque out of £32,000.
Yeah.
He said, "Well, it could have been an awful lot worse."
Yeah. Jesus, mate. And I mean, getting back to where you were at with the drinking and all that kind of thing, because I'm trying to get to the point where you hit whatever happened, where you went, enough was.
Sorry, I've
not at all, mate. It's all got a lot of it. It's all part of the story because it all plays into itself. And I'm not trying to rush the journey, as it were, not at all. I'm just was that the point?
No. After that, Dad said to me, "You need to take life a bit seriously now." So the property company that I spoke about earlier, that Dad founded in 1974, he made me a director. He said, "Look, I'm going to make you a director. You help run the business," which I did. So I was decorating. We're landlords, basically. So we've got a portfolio of properties that are tenanted. When tenants moved out, I'd go in, I'd do the improvements and the decorating. But I was still drinking, and I was going AWOL. And I remember Dad saying to me, sat me down and said, "Look, this is not working out the way I wanted it to." Gave me a bit of a talking to. And it really came to a head. I went up to Manchester. A friend of mine lived in Manchester, and we went out got drunk. He got into trouble. I stepped in. I got hit. My head hit the floor. I knocked myself out. Big gash down the back of my head. Those big curbstones in Manchester. Ended up in hospital. Horrible 3 days. Got on the train going back to Bedford, and my phone rang. And it was this guy from rehab. And he said, I've been speaking to Matt. Because Matt had, all the years he lived with me, he said, you really need to sort your head out, Glenn. You're really messed up. You're really, really messed up. You need help, And the guy said to me, I think it was a Wednesday. And he said to me, we've got a place tomorrow that's for you can come down. You can get a taxi down, train down, whatever. It was down in Bournemouth.
Okay.
Or you can come down Monday. And I said, I'll come down Monday. Give me a few more days to, finish myself off. And I did. I drank round the clock for those next 5 days. Hence the picture. And I walked into rehab on the Monday and spent two months in there.
In a what do you call it? Residential.
Yeah, residential. Yeah. You didn't actually live in the centre. The centre was we lived in a house there was 4 people sharing the house, and we'd go in to the centre every day. We'd have like a big assembly in the morning. It was very structured. The day was very structured. We'd have one-to-one therapy. We had group therapy sessions to, encourage us to get talking. And I was a closed book. I didn't want to open up at all. And then you have to do your life story. You have to write your life story and then sit in front of your group, which was about 20 people, and share your life story. But and I spent about a week doing it. And I'd got a section in there about, sexuality, being gay and all the rest of it. And I thought, and there was some seriously, dodgy people in the rehab. There was some, London gangster type people in there. And these bloody terrified me. I thought, I've got to sit there and tell my little story in front of them. I was, again, that self-esteem, validation. I'm frightened to open up in front of them. But I remember on the day when I did, and the guy that I'd gone in there with, they'd take 2 people per day, and you're both in separate groups. Well, he got drunk. He got drunk on the first day, and he was kicked out. Yeah. That's part of the contract. You can't drink. So he basically paid all that money and was sent home.
Right.
I told my life story, and I thought I've just decided to go for it, and told him everything. Then afterwards, I was like, oh my God, and the people that come up to me, giving me hugs and, you're braver than I am, and blah blah blah. But I was in there for 2 months, and I remember walking every day to the rehab. And you're obviously chemically detoxed, so I was on a course of Librium,
right?
Similar to diazepam, just so the body, because alcohol is the one drug that if you just stop dead, if you've been drinking heavily for a period, it can kill you. You can. I
think the most high-profile one is the Amy Winehouse thing, isn't it?
It was probably her stopping drinking that killed her. So they bring you off gradually. But I remember walking in there every day, and we're walking past pubs and off licenses, and I was just looking at them, and I was thinking, there's just so many triggers everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's alcohol. You turn on the television, you look on your phone, there's just
everything, mate. It's got everywhere. To be. That's the thing, isn't it? It's a drug. But in our culture, it's so integral. Good day, you celebrate with a drink. Bad day, you commiserate with a drink. Yeah. Birthdays, let's go for a drink. Promotion at work, let's go for a drink. Christmas, let's go for a drink. It's just, it symbolises so much of our culture.
Yeah.
So to have to step away from it, it's not easy. That's why I said at the beginning of the episode, well done, because it truly is not easy to step away from.
Yeah. Hence, when I left and I went back. Matt came to pick me up,
Mm.
drove all the way down to Bournemouth, drove me back. And I came back home, and the first night I remember sitting there thinking, I can't remember the last time I was at home and sober. What the hell am I going to do? And I put the telly on and I sat there, and I was bearing in mind I hadn't even scratched the surface of any,
Of the cause.
dealing with any the core of the problem. And I sat there and I just couldn't sit still. I just could not. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin.
Mm.
And I went to an AA meeting, and very nervous, room full of strangers again. And I put my hand up at the end and I said, "My name's Glenn. I'm an alcoholic. I need help. I'm fresh out of rehab. I know I'm going to drink again." And people came around me, and I got numbers, and I had a couple of false starts, a couple of relapses. But then for the next 7 years, 99.9% of that time was sober. Did everything that was suggested. I presume you've got an idea of
The
12-step
program.
fellowship.
Yes, so I have, through former guests that have been through both AA and CA. So yeah, I've heard a lot about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did all the everything that was suggested. Get a sponsor, do the steps. That's the most important thing. As part of that, you have to do this moral inventory. So it does start to look.
Yeah.
It says you make a fearless and searching moral inventory of yourself. And then you make a list of everyone you've harmed, and then go out and make amends. It's all part of the process. And then right at the end, you go and pass on the message to others. And I did that, and within 3 months, somebody asked me to sponsor them. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what I'm doing. And you're putting your trust in me to potentially save your life.
Yeah.
But I replaced drinking with recovery. That's why every night I went to a meeting to begin with. But even then, after I think I got 2 years sober, and then I had a massive relapse, and I thought there's still stuff within me that I'm not truly happy with. So the best thing I ever did was see a therapist. Thought to myself, I need just one-to-one to go and sit with somebody that knows that knows how to tease it out of me. And I had therapy for 2 years. Met this. I had a couple of people I met to begin with, and I didn't gel with them.
Yeah.
You need to kind of feel comfortable with.
That's a really worthy point with therapy. That's exactly that. No two therapists are the same. You've got to connect well with somebody, and exactly what you just said. If you meet a therapist and you don't get on well with them, try somebody else.
Yeah.
It's not that therapy isn't for you. Quite often people say that, I tried it wasn't for me. I couldn't connect with this person. They weren't really listening. It's just that therapist wasn't for you. So yes, it's a good point to bring up.
So, and there was no, I didn't go there with any time limit. I thought we'll see how it goes. And I ended up, I think it was 2 years. 2 years I was in therapy.
It's a good indication though of how long it takes to do that work.
Yeah. And it was weekly. It was every week for an hour. And sometimes I think we're going over the same stuff. But eventually, I remember the first time I cried, because, we kind of hold everything in. And I remember the first time I cried, she said, she sat there, she said, well done. And I was like, I was trying not to cry, I was like, I'm sorry, try that. And she went, no, she said, Glenn, cry. And she had a smile on her face, and I thought, yeah, she's hit a sweet spot, and with me, it was what we spoke about earlier, that shame, the shame that I felt, which I'd carried forward from teens.
What a weight to carry,
up until the age of 41.
What a huge weight. Yeah. It's a really powerful story, mate. And I say a story, it's your life. But yeah, it's really powerful, really is. And it emphasises so much of what you've discussed, mate. There's so much value in it, really is. And the point, what I do want to talk to you about, I mean, first, thank you for opening up on all of it. The thing that interests me is that uniqueness with you, where you've said that you do now drink. Speculatively here, is that because now you feel that you've done the work to address that underlying cause, i.e., that pain is either under control and understood or no longer there, that it is now safe for you to drink on a recreational level because you don't have to mask that pain anymore?
That is it in a nutshell. As I said earlier, there's a speaker called Gabor Mate.
Oh,
you
I
ever
know,
heard of
yeah,
him?
very well. I listen to him a
absolutely
lot.
brilliant.
Yeah, yeah.
And he talks a lot about addiction.
Yeah.
And he says, I don't see an alcoholic, I don't see a drug addict, I see somebody that's in pain.
Yeah.
Usually he talks a lot about childhood trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an expert on childhood trauma. I've
Yeah.
listened to a lot of his material, books and podcasts. Yeah, he's
really
fantastic.
good. And I kind of, I'd never, this is one of the reasons I won't go back to AA, because I got to a point where I thought I need to be really honest with myself and say, am I in recovery or am I still having a drink? And I thought I still want to. I've worked very hard on myself. I've still got work to do. There's still things that there's still issues that crop up every now and again. But through recovery, through discovering Buddhism, the mindfulness, the meditation,
Yep.
I've probably another podcast. There's been a lot of healing, been an awful lot of healing, and I didn't want to go back to AA because I'm not going to go back there and say, well, actually, I drink every now and again, and my life's actually all right. I like who I am now. I don't look in the mirror and think, you're this secret.
Oh, mate, it's a fucking beautiful story. It really is. I'm so glad to hear that, because I think it's really rare as well.
But it's, I have to be very careful with, because I'll bump into somebody from AA and they'll look at me and they'll say, you okay? And I'll say, yeah, I'm okay. And they look at you and they say, everything all right? And they're basically saying, are you drinking?
Yeah.
And I say, yeah, I'm okay. But I think I don't want to, not glamorize, but I don't want to say, well, actually, it's okay. I wouldn't want anybody else to think, well, actually, I wonder if, because Glenn's done it, I wonder if I can do it. If anybody came to me now and said they've got a problem with drinking, I'd say, check out the services, try AA. You need to work, you need to look within, get some therapy, AA, therapy, mindfulness, the Buddhism, becoming involved with the temple, doing all the work that I did there.
I think that's really important, mate, to emphasise, isn't it? Because what has worked for you, you've done the important work, the deep work, the causal work. So hopefully now you're at a point where you can choose, if you want to have a drink to supplement a social occasion, that's okay, you can do that and stop. But to say that, there will be other people, other addicts out there when it comes to alcohol that perhaps have not done that deep work, that just can't risk that, toppling back over into darkness, where leaving it teetotal has got to be the way. And I think predominantly that is what I hear. Because sometimes, there's so much work to do. It's not one issue, it's a myriad of issues.
It's ongoing.
Yes.
It's not, one of my closest friends, I met her through recovery. She doesn't go to meetings anymore, but she's sober. She's been sober 12 years. She still does a lot of work on herself, and we're kind of therapy for each other, because friendships, connections, so important.
Yeah.
Especially people that are on this, they've been on a similar journey. that's really important. Having a good tight circle of people around you that you know you can trust and share
Yeah.
with, and that's
I think generally, like, so many people have been on similar journeys in terms of adversities and traumas. Maybe not similar journeys when it comes to addictions and things like that. Everybody's life's different. But I think key is finding somebody that's willing to be open, that has started that journey of working on themselves, self-discovery and reflection and honesty, like being able to reflect honestly about who you are and your behaviour, and why you acted that way. And that's why, genuinely, when I say people interest me, like, I'm fascinated by people. Your story fascinates me because I see this redemption story, and that's got a beauty to it. It really has. And 9 times out of 10 with people that have come and sat with me on the podcast, fortunately, it generally is that. It's, this happened, this was the result, and this is where I am now.
Yeah.
So I'm really fortunate. I really do see it as a privilege to sit here and, provide the platform for people such as yourself to tell your journey. Because it to me, it holds so much value, and just getting that message out there of doing that inner work to try and get to the bottom of the action, or the symptom, as I call it, that's acting out, whether that's drinking, fighting, gambling, whatever that might be. That to me, it's holds so much value. It really does. And your story has been an absolute perfect example of that. And as I say, mate, I'm really happy to hear where you are. That side of things, it is fascinating. I don't hear it a lot with the now being able to go back to drink.
I still have to be very careful. I mean, this
Sure,
this last 2 years has been a tough couple of years. I mean, I lost my father 8 months ago. He was 92.
Oh wow, right, okay.
He'd been unwell for some time. He had a cardiac event a couple of years ago. His mobility was quite poor. He was really struggling. So yeah, Dad passed away 8 months ago. So it's been
Sorry
now
to hear that.
looking after Mum. Mum's got dementia. She's got Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. So she's not in a great place. So
do you have to now be careful that you don't lean on into alcohol to
I've got to be very careful. Yeah, got to be very careful. Around the time that Dad was in hospital, I thought this would be quite easy to use, because obviously I was scared. I was, I knew he was dying. I mean, even though the doctors were saying, "Oh, we'll get him back home," I knew he was dying. Especially the last 3 or 4 days. He was showing all the signs of, the skin becoming blotchy and cold, and he told me he wasn't going to come round from this, and so it would have been a perfect excuse. But immediately after he passed away, God, you've got to do so much. The worst time in your life, and there's so much to do. But I remember thinking, I really need to be on my game. I need to keep myself together.
That's the awareness that you've now built up. It's like it's a muscle, isn't it? It's a tool that you've now, that you didn't have, that you now do. I've used this analogy a few times where, looking back on our lives and our actions and the things that we used to do, we're often quite quick to judge ourselves in a non-sympathetic manner. But the way I see things, it's like being asked to do a job when you haven't got a tool. So, when you're asked to remove a nail from a wall and all you've got is your bare hands, and you rip at it and you cut your hands and you make a mess of it, but you had no tool to remove the nail, what else could you do? And that's kind of like a reflection on you at your period where you were dealing with your traumas, but you had no tools to deal with it. You dealt with it the only way that version of you could. Now you've trained, you've got tools. Of course, you wouldn't rip at it with your bare hands. You'd go and get the claw hammer, you'd pull it out easily, and no mess, no fuss. And that's how I see it now. Like, that's the new version of you, different set of tools to deal with life. You know, that it's, my point is that a lot of people are quite harsh on the previous version of themselves, but it serves no purpose to do that.
Yeah.
And that previous version of you could only work with what he had. And now you're a different version of yourself.
Yeah.
So it's to give yourself a little bit of credit that actually it's the same thing isn't going to happen because the same person doesn't stand before me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I look at that picture and think I'm a completely different person.
Exactly.
To I was back then.
Yeah. I think that's a really good place to pull things to a close, mate.
Yeah.
It's been an absolute privilege.
I could carry on talking for this, probably so many things that I've not touched upon.
I think we both could, mate. Listen, there's always room for a return visit. Yeah, it's been an honour, mate. It really has. And thank you very much for opening up and sharing all of that with me and whoever's watching and listening, because I know that everybody that comes in does it for the same reason. It's because they think that their journey could possibly help somebody else. I guess the only thing I'd ask you to address anybody that's listening that might have listened to your story and be thinking that maybe they have a problem around drinking, what advice would you give as a first step?
Be honest. Be brutally honest with yourself and reach out. Reach out. Look for it doesn't have to be a 12-step fellowship. There are other services out there.
Yeah.
If you go, for instance, in Bedford, there's about two or three different services that you can go to. You've got Smart Recovery. I forget the name of the other one. But yeah, reach out.
I'll just put in there at this point, because a lot of my audience are construction based. So if you are in the trades and anything that Glenn has said has resonated and you think that maybe you want to speak to somebody, there are charities, the likes of the Lighthouse Club and Band of Builders have both got advice lines, and they'll both touch on this subject and signpost you to organisations that can give you some first-hand help and advice. So I think, what you've said there, first step's perfect, essentially. Let's talk. That was a bit cheesy, that, wasn't it? I thought I've crowbarred that. I've just looked at my own sign, which you guys can't see. It's behind the camera. But yeah, but that's the whole message of the podcast is let's talk.
Do you normally ask the question about what my theory is about trades and the...
I do, and I'd forgotten. I'm glad you... See, this proves that Glenn watches.
Well, I thought there's two reasons for that. You either think, I want to get home, he's waffled on far too long.
None of that, mate.
Or
I do usually ask. I had forgotten. If you've watched like recent episodes, I probably only remember 50% of the time.
Okay.
It's like the guest photographs afterwards as well. I normally forget to do that, so don't let me forget that one. Right. Let's pretend you didn't have to prompt me on that. Glenn, in your opinion, why do you think that the construction industry in the UK is so adversely affected around the mental health arena?
Okay, well, there's an article in The Guardian that you may have read it.
No.
I think it was 2019, and they were talking about the figures. Actually, the figures that you mentioned, it seems to, as you said, it's an upward trajectory.
It is an upward trajectory, yeah.
But there was a list of, first at the very top was the construction industry.
Yep.
And second was administrative jobs.
Okay.
And then there were drivers. But within construction, they mentioned, as you mentioned before, plasterers, labourers, and crane operators, which I thought was quite random. Obviously, the fact that in the construction industry, it's predominantly men. Men are 4 times more likely to take their own lives than women. They also mentioned, obviously, addictions. When I was staying in this travel holiday inn, most of the people that were staying there were tradesmen. They're having a few drinks in the bar downstairs. They're going upstairs at 8 o'clock. They're getting on their phone. There's a huge problem with gambling as well, online gambling, because they're, away from home, isolation, addiction.
Definitely worth.
It's a good
it is.
article.
You're dead right. I went through a period of my life where we used to do a lot of away work. We used to do insurance contracting. We used to work all over the country, and there isn't anything else to do. So I'm not really sure how you combat that, but we used to do it. I got my team of 5-6 people, and we'd go and stay all across the country. But you'd finish work, and then what do you do when you work away? Only one place to go, really: food and pub.
Yeah.
And short of, it's a bit crap, innit? You think, well, I'll go for some food and I'll go back and sit in my hotel room on my own and just watch telly until I get up tomorrow and go to work. So a lot of the time it does involve drinking, and then drinking inspires more poor choices. And then that spiral begins. I wish there was there's got to be an answer for it. There's got to be some action. There's some great organisations out there spreading the word now. But I can only hope that those figures start to head the right way. But yeah, thank you for your insight. Yeah. It's a valid one, and working
also,
away.
What you do. It's
thank
fantastic.
You. Yeah, I'm just somebody sat here talking. That's it, really. There's something that was highlighted to me recently, really. There's one thing being raising awareness, which is what I would put myself in the category of, which is trying to get people talking and recognising. And step one, essentially, is like that light bulb moment where you go, okay, maybe there's a problem with something. But it's then the next step that we need to look into, the action, what can be done now, And there's one of the organisations out there at the moment, 3 weeks, it will be announced by now. We are in May, myself and a group of other former guests of the podcast are going to do a nighttime climb of Snowdon.
Oh, wow.
Snowdon's not the hardest mountain to climb, but to caveat
why nighttime? Is it
the climb from darkness, Glenn?
Oh, okay.
So we're going to do it to raise mental health awareness, but to symbolise the climb out of bad mental health. So we're going to do it at night with the aim of reaching the summit at sunrise. So to see sunrise on top of Snowdon, which will be pretty epic.
Out of the darkness into the light.
There we go. But we're going to do that, and we're going to be raising money for the Lost City project, which is the Project 7000. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No.
Okay, I'll explain it briefly. So On the Tools have launched a project to raise mental health awareness, but more than that, to take action. So they're trying to raise £2.5 million over the next 3 years to pay for the likes of counselling, therapy, and things that can actually help people suffering with mental health, rather than just raising awareness. Project 7000, the Lost City, for anyone that hasn't heard of it, and you yourself, Glenn, it refers to the last decade, where at the moment, on average, 2 tradespeople per day are taking their own life. That's around about 700 a year. And over the last decade, around about 7,000 people from construction have taken their own life. And that is a workforce big enough to build a city the size of Cardiff, the Lost City, the city that will never be, because all of those tradespeople have taken their own life. Fantastic initiative that's been set up by On the Tools. So there's a group of 16 of us that are going to climb Snowdon at night. In the build-up, we're going to be raising as much money as we can for the Lost City project, and trying to raise mental health awareness and bring a bit of attention to it along the way. First time I've spoken about that on a podcast as well, because I just thought, am I going to have announced it by then? But I'm speaking to future people 3 weeks in the future, and it will be out by then. So there you go. Please go and donate.
I will do.
But yeah, so we will be raising money for that. But
when's that happening? Snowdon?
Saturday, the 10th of May, come rain or shine, we will be doing it. We're going to be doing it. We'll have professional guides, because it's going to be dark, and I really don't want to be accountable for anyone walking off something they shouldn't. So it's going to be professionally, guided, and it should be good. It should be good.
Excellent. Best of luck.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Go and donate again. But yeah, on that note, Glenn, thank you very much for giving up your time, mate, and being a part of this. And yeah, I'm
Been a
really
pleasure.
grateful. So thank you. Normally at this point, I would say where to find you on socials, but you're not really on socials.
Not really. No.
Unless, I mean, if there is anywhere that you want to be contacted, please go ahead.
Well, I mean, my name on Facebook. Yeah.
I guess if anyone has heard your story and then wants to reach out, I mean, there's your Instagram channel, which I could link in the description. Entirely up to you. We can talk about
just
that.
Search
afterwards.
my name on Facebook, because I wouldn't even. Instagram. I'm not very.
I can put the Facebook link on. That's fine. Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah.
And also a big thank you to the Funky Peach for our guest merchandise, of which I will bestow upon Glenn so he can look dapper in Talking Tradesman merch.
Hope you got XL.
I have got XL. You're quite fine. You're quite fine. But yeah, thank you to everybody for listening. Glenn, again, massive thank you. I'll catch you guys soon on the next one.